Imagine looking out at a bone-dry yard. The sky has been absolutely clear, baking the earth below, and there has not been a single drop of rain in 4 solid days. There are no underground pipes running to this spot. There's no hidden well, but if you walk a little closer, you hear it. The steady, rhythmic sound of water dripping into a plastic trough. It has been doing that all night long. And that right there, that is pure drinking water, pulled completely out of thin air while the rest of the neighborhood was fast asleep. Best of all, it only cost me exactly $12 to build the simple rig that is making it. Welcome to the genius $12 setup that lets you harvest water from the air. Now, I'm not going to stand here and try to convince you that this is some highly classified space-age technology. It absolutely is not. In fact, if you were to dig into the archives of engineering, you would find that brilliant minds have understood this exact principle for over 100 years. They call them fog collectors or dew harvesters. They have been quietly keeping communities alive in the coastal villages of Chile, high up in the rugged mountains of Morocco, and across the arid stretches of rural Ethiopia. These are isolated places where the municipal water grid simply does not reach, and the old reliable wells have long since run completely dry. So, if this works so incredibly well, why is it not on the front page of every home improvement magazine? Why isn't every suburban dad setting one up right next to the backyard charcoal grill? The reason is honestly a little bit frustrating. It works far too well, and it costs far too little money for anyone to patent it, put it in a shiny cardboard box, and sell it to you for a massive profit. But here's the crazy part. You already know exactly how this works. You have been witnessing this scientific miracle your entire life. You just never stopped to connect the dots. Think back to a sweltering July afternoon on the back porch, maybe listening to a baseball game on the AM radio. You pour yourself a tall glass of iced tea. Within minutes, what happens to the outside of that glass? It gets covered in a thick layer of sweat, right? Water droplets form out of nowhere and slide down onto your wooden coaster. That is condensation. Think about the morning paperboy tossing the news onto your front lawn. If you walk out there to grab it before the sun gets too high, your leather boots get soaked from the morning dew on the grass. Or look at a spiderweb strung between 2 wooden fence posts at dawn, shimmering with heavy drops of water. That little spider is doing effortlessly what a $3,000 commercial atmospheric water generator attempts to replicate using a massive industrial compressors, loud fans, and a hefty monthly electric bill. The air surrounding you at this very second, no matter if you're sitting in a humid Florida swamp or a dry Arizona suburb, is carrying water. It is totally invisible, suspended right there in the atmosphere, just waiting for the perfect moment to bump into something cold enough to make it let go. Did you know that during the height of the Cold War, military engineers spent millions of taxpayer dollars trying to figure out how to extract water from the air for troops stationed in barren deserts? They drafted up plans for massive fuel-guzzling machines that sounded like a commercial jet taking off. Meanwhile, nature had already perfected the system millions of years ago, silently and completely for free, using nothing but temperature changes and surface area. Sometimes, the old school, low-tech way beats out the multi-million-dollar defense budget every single time. Let us put the sheer scale of this into perspective. At any given moment, the Earth's atmosphere is holding roughly 37 million billion gallons of fresh water. Just let that astronomical number sink in for a second. 37 million billion gallons. That is more water floating invisibly above our heads than in every single river on the entire face of the Earth combined. It is a massive, floating, invisible ocean, stretching from coast to coast, and almost nobody is collecting it. Until now. To understand how we tap into this invisible reservoir, we need to talk about a specific threshold in meteorology known as the dew point. Imagine driving a classic 1972 Ford truck. When you slam on those heavy drum brakes, all of that massive forward momentum has to go somewhere, right? It turns into heat. Well, when the evening air hits a surface that is sitting at or below that precise dew point temperature, the invisible water vapor carrying it has absolutely nowhere left to go but out. It condenses, turns into liquid water, and begins to drip. What we are building today is fundamentally a giant catcher's mitt for that exact handoff to happen. We are creating a large surface area, angling it directly into the evening breeze and tilting it just right so that gravity, the most reliable force on Earth, pulls those heavy droplets down to collect at the bottom. There are 0 moving parts here, no spark plugs to change, no electrical cords to trip over, and absolutely no daily maintenance required. You set it up in the backyard right after the evening news, and it clocks in for the night shift while you sleep. Did you know that the concept of dew harvesting was even studied by the military? During the height of the Cold War, defense engineers spent millions of taxpayer dollars trying to figure out how to extract water from the air for troops stationed in barren deserts. They drafted up plans for massive, fuel-guzzling machines that sounded like a commercial jet taking off. Meanwhile, Nature had already perfected the system millions of years ago, silently and completely for free, using nothing but temperature changes and surface area. Sometimes the old school, low-tech way beats out the multi-million-dollar defense budget every single time. Now, let us get right down to brass tacks. Here's your shopping list, and I'm going to shoot straight with you. This is genuinely all you need. First, you need a section of shade cloth mesh measuring 6 feet by 6 feet. You can find this down at your local garden center or the neighborhood hardware store for about $5. But listen closely, because this is crucial. The tighter the weave of that fabric, the better your results will be. You are looking for something that resembles the trusty bug screen on your back porch door, not the wide-open netting of a backyard volleyball net. That mesh is doing all the heavy lifting here, so do not try to pinch pennies on the weave. Next, pick up 4 lengths of 1-inch PVC pipe to construct your outer frame. That will set you back maybe $2, or even less if you have some scraps laying around in the garage behind the lawnmower. Grab a handful of plastic zip ties. We all have a dusty coffee can full of those sitting on a workbench somewhere. Finally, you need a standard plastic rain gutter section to act as your collection trough, which runs about $3 or $4, and a couple of heavy landscaping bricks from the flower bed to prop the whole rig up at the correct angle. If you tally all of that up, you are looking at $10 to $14 total. If you already have the zip ties and the bricks, your grand total drops to an unbelievable $8. You do not need a whole toolbox for this. The only tool required is a handsaw to cut the PVC, and honestly, if you ask the friendly folks at the hardware store, they will usually make those cuts for you right there in the aisle, completely free of charge. Putting the frame together is simpler than assembling a vintage Lincoln log set. You just connect those 4 PVC sections into a sturdy rectangle, roughly 4 feet tall by 3 feet wide. Remember, we're not building fine mahogany furniture here. It just needs to hold its shape and take a stiff breeze without folding like a cheap lawn chair. If you do not want to mess around with messy plumbing glue and elbow fittings, just crisscross some heavy-duty zip ties at the corners. It will hold together perfectly fine. But here's the most important step. Once your frame is set, stretch that shade cloth mesh over the piping. You need to pull it incredibly tight. I'm talking 0 sag. Secure it to the frame with a zip tie every 6 inches along every single edge. Think about how a marching band snare drum is tuned. You want that exact same taut tension across the entire black surface. Why? Because sagging mesh creates low spots where water pools up. Pooling water means much slower runoff, and slower runoff means you collect significantly less water by the time the sun rises. Now, here is the one critical mistake that folks often make when they first build this setup in their driveway. They finish tying the last knot, step back, and lay the whole frame flat on the ground, stretching it out like a canvas tarp over a cord of firewood. Please, do not do that. Flat means the water simply sits there, pooling up in the center until the morning sun breaks over the horizon and evaporates all your hard work right back into the sky. What you want is a tilt. You're aiming for an angle of 15 to 30 degrees. Think of it like leaning an old wooden extension ladder against the aluminum siding of your house, or the gentle pitch of a classic A-frame cabin roof. It is a shallow, deliberate angle. With that specific slant, every single microscopic droplet that forms on the mesh naturally rolls downhill by its own weight. It hits that bottom edge and drips obediently into the plastic trough waiting patiently below it. Go ahead and set your gutter section directly under that lower lip. If you are the kind of guy who likes to tinker in the garage, you can easily run a short length of rubber tubing from the trough directly into a plastic storage jug. But honestly, that is not required to see this miracle work on the very first night. Next comes placement, and I cannot stress this enough. Placement matters far more than most people realize. You have to face this rig directly into the wind, not sideways and definitely not facing away from it. You want the night air actively moving through the mesh, not just swirling around it. Walk around your backyard right at dusk. Remember when our grandfathers used to step out onto the porch, lick a finger, and hold it up to the sky to check the weather? Do exactly that. Feel which direction that evening breeze is coming from. That is the exact direction the front of your frame needs to point. Furthermore, you need to get the whole apparatus off the ground just a little bit. Elevating it even 1 foot makes a tremendous difference in your yield. You see, the air that is sitting right at ground level is naturally drier and significantly warmer than the air flowing just a bit higher up. And finally, keep it tucked away from wherever the morning sun hits first in your yard. You want that precious dew to build up undisturbed through the entire night, and you want it still sitting in that trough when you stroll out in your bathrobe to collect it, not burned off before your alarm clock even rings. Set it up right before the sun goes down, head inside, and come back out at dawn. That is the entire routine. Did you know that those classic rooster weather vanes you used to see perched on top of every red barn and suburban cupola across America were not just decorative pieces of folk art? Knowing the exact direction of the prevailing wind was a matter of absolute survival for early American farmers. A sudden shift in wind direction at dusk was the most reliable indicator of an incoming cold front or a massive drop in barometric pressure. By paying attention to the wind, just like we are doing with our water harvester today, they knew exactly when to protect their crops from a sudden overnight frost. What is happening out in your yard overnight is just good, old-fashioned physics doing what it always does. As the ambient temperature drops, the moving air hits the mesh surface and cools down right along with it. When it crosses that critical dew point, the moisture floating in the air has nowhere left to hide. It condenses out of thin air and forms a tiny droplet. That droplet inevitably finds another one sitting nearby. They merge, they get heavier, and gravity does the rest, rolling them right down into your trough. By morning, you have literally gotten something for nothing. Let me share my own experience. My very first night running this exact setup, I had incredibly average conditions. The humidity was normal. The temperatures were hovering right there in the mid-50s. There was absolutely no rolling fog, and definitely no rain in the forecast. I walked out at dawn and collected just over half a liter of crystal clear water. Now, I know half a liter sounds modest, but consider the fact that those were about as average, run-of-the-mill conditions as you can possibly get. There was nothing special about that night whatsoever, but if you live down in the humid coastal areas, nestled in a foggy river valley, or anywhere that sees that thick morning marine layer roll in, folks are pulling a full liter, sometimes 2 liters, or even more from a setup this exact size in a single night. Imagine scaling that simple mesh up to a full 10 by 10 feet. Now you're talking about serious, life-sustaining daily water production. A standard American family of 4 needs about 2 liters of drinking water per person per day. If you scale this project up correctly, and you happen to live in the right climate, you could theoretically cover that entire daily requirement from the thin air alone. No monthly utility bills, no massive city infrastructure, and absolutely no asking the local zoning board for permission. It is true, off-grid independence at its finest. Now, let us talk about actually drinking this water. Atmospheric water is actually remarkably clean right from the start. Think about it logically. It has not touched the dirty ground. It has not run through miles of questionable municipal soil, and it has not traveled through aging, rusty city pipes. It completely skips most of the things that make surface water so incredibly complicated to treat. There is no agricultural runoff, no heavy sediment, and usually no harmful bacteria. However, if you live in a bustling urban area, perhaps near heavy highway traffic or industrial factories, the mesh can naturally pick up airborne particulates over time. But the fix for that takes exactly 5 minutes and costs about $3. It is just like an old school Boy Scout fieldcraft trick. Take an empty plastic soda bottle, cut the bottom completely off, and flip it upside down so the narrow neck is pointing straight down to the earth. Now, you're going to layer materials inside it, working from the bottom to the top. First, stuff in a tight wad of pure cotton. Next, pour in a thick layer of activated charcoal. You can grab a carton of this at any local neighborhood aquarium shop for a couple of bucks. On top of that, add a layer of fine, clean sand, and finish it off with one final layer of cotton at the very top. Did you know that activated charcoal, the exact same stuff you're putting in your homemade DIY water filter, was heavily relied upon by American troops during World War I? Soldiers carried heavy gas masks equipped with activated charcoal filters to survive toxic gas attacks in the trenches of Europe. The incredibly porous nature of the charcoal acts like a microscopic sponge, trapping invisible chemical toxins and holding onto them so they cannot pass through. That century-old battlefield technology is the exact same proven science keeping your backyard drinking water pure today. Pour your newly collected overnight water straight through the top of that bottle and let it drip slowly out of the neck into a clean glass container below. That is your homemade filtration system. It handles the stray dust particulates, absorbs almost all chemical concerns thanks to the charcoal, and adds maybe a single minute to your morning routine. If you want to be 100% absolutely sure it is safe, simply boil it on the kitchen stove. Or you can add exactly 1 drop of plain, unscented household bleach per liter of water. Wait 30 minutes, and that water is as safe as treated tap water. In fact, depending on the age of the cast iron pipes running under your city, it is probably a whole lot cleaner. Free water from the sky, filtered in 5 minutes. For a one-time setup, cost of exactly $12. But the thing about this project that really keeps me up at night is just how incredibly old this concept actually is. People have been doing variations of this for centuries. Long before the invention of electricity or the modern mechanical water pump, the ancient Incas built massive, intricate stone structures specifically engineered to condense water from thick mountain fog. Simple fog nets have been harvesting fresh drinking water in the Canary Islands for generations. There are even Bronze Age stone wells in the harsh Negev desert that modern archaeologists now believe were not built to hold water, but to actively collect it from the morning dew. These were massive, dry stacked stone structures built for the sole purpose of pulling moisture out of the dry desert wind. And yet, somewhere in the last 100 years, as reliable indoor plumbing spread across the country during the great post-war housing boom, and municipal water towers became the default for every American suburb, we simply stopped thinking about it. We stopped needing to. You turned the shiny chrome handle on the kitchen sink, the water magically flowed, and so this ancient, life-saving knowledge just quietly sat on a dusty shelf in the Library of History and was forgotten. For $12 and one single afternoon of tinkering in the garage, that ancient knowledge is securely back in your hands. I do not know what your current situation is, or what led you to click on this video today. Maybe you're just thinking about emergency preparedness and keeping your family safe when the grid inevitably goes down. Maybe you are already living out off the grid, and this simple trick fills a very real gap in your daily water supply. Or maybe you're just like me, a guy who loves building things with his own two hands that actually do something genuinely useful, and you found this video at 2 o'clock in the morning because your curiosity simply would not let you sleep. It does not matter. The science works either way. And now you know exactly how to do it. But hold on just a minute. Before you grab your car keys and head down to the local hardware store to pick up your PVC pipe, let us dive just a little bit deeper into the fascinating history and the everyday applications of this forgotten survival skill. Did you know that during the catastrophic Dust Bowl of the 1930s, when the American Midwest was choked by endless black blizzards and devastating droughts, some desperate farmers utilized very similar, rudimentary condensation techniques? When the rain completely stopped falling for years on end, families in states like Oklahoma and Texas would hang large, tightly woven cotton sheets across their front porches, or string them up between dead trees to catch whatever sparse morning dew they could. They would manually wring those heavy, wet sheets out by hand into metal tin pails just to keep their prized heirloom vegetable seeds alive in the baked earth. It was a harsh, grueling time, but it proved that when modern convenience totally fails, the old ways can still put food on the dinner table. Did you know that managing the moisture in the air was a literal matter of life and death during the 1960s space race? When American astronauts were strapped into the Apollo command modules, hurtling through the freezing vacuum of space towards the moon, human breath and sweat created dangerous amounts of humidity inside that tiny metal capsule. NASA engineers had to design incredibly complex environmental systems to capture that exact same atmospheric condensation. They even utilized advanced hydrogen fuel cells that miraculously produced pure, drinkable water as a chemical byproduct. While you and I are just using a $5 garden shade cloth instead of billion-dollar aerospace engineering, the fundamental science of manipulating atmospheric water vapor remains exactly the same today as it was during the Apollo missions. Now, let us talk about how you can take this simple $12 setup and actually put it to work in your own backyard, beyond just packing it away for an emergency survival situation. Think about your summer vegetable garden. By the time late August rolls around, the relentless afternoon sun can absolutely bake the soil, and strict municipal water restrictions often go into effect. Imagine building a miniature, 2-foot version of this exact mesh frame and positioning it directly above your raised garden beds or over a thirsty tomato plant. As the night air naturally cools, the condensation drips slowly and steadily right into the soil, exactly where the deep roots need it the most. It is completely automatic, self-watering irrigation that does not raise your monthly utility bill by a single red cent. Or consider the classic family road trip. If you are ever driving a vintage motorhome or towing a camper trailer out across the vast, lonely stretches of the Nevada desert, keeping a rolled-up square of shade cloth and a few short lengths of collapsible piping in the trunk could be the ultimate insurance policy. If your radiator suddenly boils over or you get stranded miles off the main interstate, knowing how to trap the cool night air could easily yield enough emergency drinking water to keep your family safe until the highway patrol rolls by the very next morning. Knowledge is the absolute lightest thing you can possibly carry in your toolbox. It is the only tool that never rusts, never expires, and never needs new batteries. Now, I want to hear from you. Which part of this atmospheric water harvester surprised you the most? Have you ever noticed this condensation effect out in your own neck of the woods? Or maybe you have your own old school trick for collecting rain or dew around the homestead? Drop a comment down below and share your wisdom with the rest of the community. We are all here to learn from each other's hard-earned experiences. If you found this valuable, hit that like button. Share it with a friend who appreciates a good weekend project, and make sure to subscribe so you never miss out on our next deep dive into the lost arts of self-reliance. Until next time, keep your eyes open, stay curious, and keep building.